Hello, thank you for joining me tonight. I am so excited to welcome Nancy Moscatiello, the investigative. Thank you for joining me. Sorry, I have an assistant here. I am adding her now. Add as a moderator. Does that work? Nancy Moscatiello is joining me to answer all of our questions. Hello, Nancy. Can you hear me?
Here we
We did
are.
it. It's a surprise every time if it will work. Hello,
Hello,
hello. How
how are
are you?
you?
I want to know more how you are. Last night was a big night.
It was really exciting. I was excited to finally to come out, right?
Oh my gosh. Yes.
No, no football to get in the way.
Tell me everything. What did you think of last night? How are you feeling?
Oh, it was great. It was exciting for it to finally make air for, for everyone to finally see what so many of us saw for so many years, and to kind of understand it a little better and to really get that feeling of what it looked like and how it could go on for so long. And I think that was important. I mean, I know a lot of people listen to the podcast, but it was really, I hope, eye-opening to see everything as well.
I feel like we're just barely scratching the surface, honestly, when
Yeah.
when you see that part. Because that's a question. I mean, there's so many questions for you, but just a lot of people are wondering how she was so successful at getting garnering so much sympathy, attention, money,
Hmm.
resources. I guess we can just dig right in because most people have listened to the podcast or know about the story. So, why do you think she was so successful? Because I'm an oncology nurse. You're
Hmm.
the investigative. We'll get a little bit more into like how you got into the podcast and everything. But I have so many patients that have a hard time getting support from their families. They don't have people there to help them with groceries, laundry. How was she so successful at getting so many people to
So many.
offer up, money, whatever you need, childcare, rides, trips to New York,
Yeah.
first class plane tickets? Like, how did she do that?
Well, I think part of it was just being would seem to be an extremely charming, generous in her own right, very friendly, very giving. People described her, like bubbly and outgoing and all of those things. And I think when someone is put to you that they're so ill and but yet they're so bright in sunshine and all of this, I think it's a very intriguing thing to be around, a person to be around, and to inspiring, really. And I think you get very drawn into that.
Mm.
And she wove a tale of ups and downs. It's very soap opera like. So I think a lot of those things just kind of pull you in, and you just want to help in any way you can.
What is that called? Like rubbernecking, when you hear about somebody who's very ill or has something bad going on, like people will kind of check in for updates to
Yeah, to
see
kind of
into
see
their
how
life.
things are going. And I think the way she put everything out there, and the tale she wove for everyone was really kept you hanging on and hoping, and in that matter, because it was such a large church community, praying together and hoping for miracles and getting little bits and pieces of those miracles. She would be on the upswing, and it would be a very big surge of everyone being so excited of how well she was doing, and then the rug would get pulled out, and there would be this down slope of things happening, and then back up again. And
Gosh,
um
you talking, it just occurs to me now, she's basically a fiction writer and she's the
yeah.
main character, and it's like she was writing a book live
Well,
and
she
you
was she
hear
was
what your
writing she
readers
was writing
want.
her blog,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So it,
exactly.
it was definitely um a labor, almost a labor of love to her. I think it brought her a lot of things she must have needed, or however you want to think about that. But yeah, the attention, the all eyes on her, the validation, the uplifting, the being seen, being heard, you know But I think
And
that was a big part of it. But with Amanda, like, again, you see very quickly in the blog, having it from beginning to end, and knowing all the entries and reading through it for so as long as I have, it was very quickly that there was that ask for money, and I need this by this time, or this horrible thing's going to happen. And so there was that manipulation started very, very early.
yes, I can't wait. I love Lisa talked a little bit. The full story wasn't there last night, but about the first
Mhm.
time Amanda asks for a check for $500 from her. And I cannot wait to have her on to say the rest of that story because
Mhm.
that is my favorite story. But it just how quickly, and it was very, this test to save my life is $500, and you can give me
Right.
that $500 to save my life. And kind of giving people opportunities to give that they may not ever be otherwise come across, this way to be a hero.
Absolutely. How you can help, and how appreciative it is. Like we saw Rebecca Cafiro mention that as soon that she felt that, I'm going to give $500, and that response, posting in her blog, thanking, and you've changed my life forever. Very, very appreciative, which, as anyone would be. But I think, that's a big part of her charm.
Yes.
Um, you
That,
didn't go
people
unnoticed.
like to give, but then
Mhm.
also it feels good when somebody recognizes that. That makes you
Absolutely.
want to give
Sure.
more. Absolutely. There's something that my family worked with her, and at one point my sister had a baby, and she had never met my sister, but she sent, I think, books and all these gifts for my sister's baby. And again, she'd never met my sister, had no connection to her besides that she worked with family, but just that
Yeah.
whole kind of like inappropriate giving almost, where you're like, you wouldn't, why would did you give so much where you never don't even know the mom? It's like a kind gesture,
Yeah.
but it's almost makes you feel off kilter, like I'm receiving too much, I need to give back,
Hmm.
kind of a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, she was very engaging with a lot of people.
Yes. Okay, so how did this go from last night was revealed that Lisa Berry was the secret source?
Yep.
That was exciting. I think a lot of people were curious, and that was always my thing as an oncology nurse. I always thought the only, we were all speculating about it, and I kept saying the only person that could be your source is a nurse or a medical
Hmm.
professional who can look at her records and say 100% on her diagnosis list, nowhere is cancer. I said it had to be someone who saw her medical records. So the fact that it was Lisa Berry really threw me off when I learned that, because she's not a medical professional. And so,
Right.
can you maybe talk a little bit more about number one, how did Lisa know for sure that Amanda was
Mhm.
faking?
I think for Lisa and for Steve, of course, um, the fact that they interacted with her 2 years prior,
Mhm.
right? And not just like, oh, we're friends, we passed, we know each other from class. Their kids, the two girls hung out a lot. They were for several months hanging out before Amanda even talked about, mentioned that she had cancer. And it came about from zero to, I have 4 to 12 months to live. So, and so this was so out of the blue. And I think in the next episode, we get into a little bit more detail about when exactly the can I have cancer came up, for the first time. And so, we'll leave you a little bit to learn a little bit more for the next episode. But so, that was, and then she started realizing, so many of the things she had told her over time. She started to question all of that, and she started to, really retrace the relationship, and realizing there was all these odd stories and odd information. And she went and started, doing then what, like, as you see, like I would do, fact check that,
Mhm.
making some calls, asking more questions.
I love
She, I
that.
think at one
The
point,
brain bleed was one of my favorite
yeah,
lies
oh
that
yeah, the
Amanda,
draining of the
or the
brain,
brain
swimming
drain.
underwater, yeah. And there was a lot of episodes like that. We touch upon, a bunch in the podcast, but yet in the docu-series as well. But so that too, so by the time, fast forward 2015, she gets this email just from another friend
Oh, that was
saying, hey, about Chili's, hey, about
2015. The
donating
Chili's is
money. You know,
2015.
that
Yeah.
was the 4 years later.
Yeah, four or
Um,
5 years later.
after,
Okay.
and that would have been 3 years, later after they pushed them out of their life and said, we want nothing to do with you. You are lying. You are
Yeah.
lying. And then to see that and be like, oh my God. And to read your diagnosis in 2012. So that, to me, that it was enough for me to then go, okay, if this is accurate and this is true, I'm now looking at it in a completely different perspective. I'm looking at it from she lied in 2010, 11. It's now 2015, and there's three. She puts it out there. I've just got diagnosed after having my baby in 2012.
Yes.
And that also, as Steve talked about, Corey came to him that night of the birthday party that we saw and said, she's so sick. They didn't think she was coming to the party that night. And those pictures that you see, the actual pictures, that is Amanda, with 4 months to live. Like, she's all decked out. She's gorgeous and, doesn't look far from death. So, come on. So I think that all in their head, they just were like, oh my God, this poor young lady. And they just getting married and all of that. So, yeah, I think by the time she saw that blog those years later and went through those 3 years, it just came crashing back to her.
I
And
mean,
she really felt
Lisa,
the need to do something. And
yeah.
she did the main routes of trying, calling police, calling a tip line, not my tip line, but like the police tip line, and never heard anything. And she was like, how do you do this? How do you get help? Or what do we do? Then it was
Totally.
just happenstance that she came across my posting,
Facebook
and
comment.
it took. I talked with her. We got the email. I started looking at everything. Then we set up a call. Um, we talked quite a bit. We talked with um, the people that I work with. We had a nice conference call. So, like, it wasn't just like, oh, I believe her, let's go. There was a lot of checking also on who Lisa was. Tell me more about you and how this all happened. And then I was able to speak with other people that were at that party and that were told the same thing from Amanda and Corey.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah, so that
So it
I
wasn't
knew, like,
just
okay,
Lisa and
it
Steve who
wasn't,
thought
yeah,
she
well, I
had
had
cancer.
to make sure, like, what she told me was accurate as well. And so she was like, yeah, you can talk to some friends that were there. Sure. Like, let them tell you what we all heard and what we all experienced and all of that.
So was
So,
Lisa the only one then who that lie came back around for?
I think there were some others that were in their friend group, and they just were like, this can't, everyone, I think, just, it's hard to wrap your head around that that's what's looked like
Yeah.
happened. Um, and I think what Lisa, like, they were just like, we don't want to be around these people. They're lying to us about all this. What else are they lying about? And again, you fast forward a few years when it comes back, um, and she just felt like this has grown out of control, and she saw so much being donated over that 3 year, the 3 years of the blog at least, that she felt compelled to try and do something more than she had already tried to do. Yeah.
Yes. So the timeline, a lot of people have questions about the timeline. I tried to make basically one big thing, but and you guys haven't gotten into Alita yet
No,
on the docu-series.
right.
So coming, we know from the podcast about that whole thing. Literally, have you seen the movie The Hand That Rocks the Cradle?
Yes.
That is Amanda. Like, she didn't
Yeah.
try to kill Alita, but she basically did.
Yeah.
So
I
that
do
whole,
think she wanted to be Alita. I think she wanted what Alita had. I really do.
for sure. That
You know,
was
knowing
that part.
knowing Alita and now as well as I do, she is such a genuine, bubbly, charismatic. Like, she is who Amanda
Was trying
became.
to be.
Yeah,
Well, it's funny too because she was basically the nanny, the babysitter, and
right.
then she dethroned Alita from being the wife and mother of the family, and then basically, like, when I heard that she wrote her out of the school forms and just listed herself as mom,
Oh, in the podcast, yes.
because I had no idea. I came in when she was a teacher, so we had no idea about
No,
Alita or Jessa or any of that. So that was a huge piece that was crazy.
Hmm.
But just quickly, because I think this is very helpful for people to go back on. So 2003 to 2007, if you listen to the podcast, or you will soon learn, that was the Alita family. She's working with Jamie, helping the
Correct.
family.
Yeah.
2010 is when she meets uh, the Berries.
Lisa and
Yes.
Steve. Yes.
And then, so she meets them in September, and then November, she tells them she has cancer. And I thought it was very interesting that she tells them that right after they say, "Oh, this beloved father in the community raised we raised $100,000 for him because he's dying." And she then, I think it's 2 or 3 days later, she's like, "Oh, by the way, I also have cancer."
Right away. Yes. Yes.
And then they get married in 2011 in April. So that is just 6 months after
Right. So
they
they
meet the
got,
Berries.
yeah, and there's a little back and forth. So they had I think they had a like a justice of the peace wedding where they went and did that, and then they had another ceremony wedding um about a year later, I think it was.
Okay.
So there's two different wedding
Got it.
wedding
But
dates, so to
the
speak.
wedding that they ask Lisa and Steve to be
That
in
was
is only
the
and then
latter, like yeah.
and but that's
That was
only
the
6 months after they meet them. So I thought that was
yes.
interesting that they asked Steve to be a groomsman after Corey had only known him for 6 months.
Yeah, yeah, and I think they get into that a little bit more too. Well, the podcast they obviously discussed it, but yeah, it was very, um, they didn't know what to make of that, right? They were, oh, okay, yeah, of course, like they're friends, they're with each other a lot, and but in the same manner, I think they also thought that was uh, strange that there weren't other closer friends, and since then I've talked to the different bridesmaids and such that have felt the same way, that they were
Mhm.
friendly but not that close when they were asked to be a part of this wedding. So yeah.
Interesting. Oh yeah, we'll get into Corey filed for divorce while Amanda has been in prison. We'll get into that. Okay, so they're married, and then they're married in April, and then in August they tell Steve and Lisa that she's terminal, and
Right
then
at the big party, yes.
and then in 2012 is when she has their first baby. And
And she gets diagnosed for the first time, according to her
okay,
blog.
so this is Lisa's phone calls where she's like, "I thought you were dying," and then Amanda says, "The
Right,
baby is
right.
reversing my cancer." That's
I think that was very
2012.
early in the pregnancy, and then you got your 9 months, and then you have I gave birth, and this is what they figured out.
Got it. So the first baby she has, that's where she's saying, "I had a beautiful baby, and then I found out I had cancer."
Correct.
Got
Yes.
it. Okay. And then she's terminal, and we'll reach the rest of the timeline later. But I think those details are helpful to kind of solidify that 2010 is when she is diagnosed with cancer. 2011, she says she's terminal. And then 2012, she's saying, "I'm pregnant and I was diagnosed for the first time with cancer." And so Lisa
Right.
Berry at that point definitely is like, "You are absolutely lying because
Right.
you
Right. And
just said you
again,
were dying."
Lisa didn't see it in 2012. She saw it in 2015.
That's right.
So,
Okay, so then it's 3 years later, and
yeah.
those
So
numbers
she
are
gets to see
definitely not adding up,
she gets to see a whole bevy of what's been going on.
especially for Lisa's first uh, learning of Amanda lying about cancer to be that 4 different Chevys are coming together to support Amanda, and hundreds of
Chili's.
Chili's, sorry, Chili's. The Chili's are supporting Amanda, 4 different ones, and that hundreds of people are coming together. It's just that must have been just so shocking and bizarre to see that the dates are so wrong.
I
And
think it was, you know, getting that email, you saying, "Hey, how about donating and go come to this thing and donate money to this family at this church?" Seeing who it was, going back in the blog, like all of that just coming back to her and going, "Oh my God, like this is not okay." More baby back ribs involved.
no,
Oh my
isn't
goodness.
that awesome blossom? Wait, where were the fundraisers? Chili's?
Chili's. Yeah.
Chili's is the awesome blossom.
I don't
Oh,
know.
it is baby back. There's probably all the delicious foods, but they did not pay for them. They left their child care provider to pay for their bill, right?
Yes,
Isn't that the
yeah,
party where
we
Mahasti
talked about
says,
that in the podcast, and there'll be more to come. When I think at first episode, you got to kind of get a little taste of everyone. You met Mahasti, who was the babysitter for the first baby. And you'll learn a lot more coming up. And then also there was a couple of friends and supporters that kind of got introduced, some that were in the podcast, some that were not.
Can we
I'm
talk about
excited for people to
Lindsay?
hear from Angie, who was not in the podcast, but is in this because you'll learn a lot about her. And it took me a lot to find her, and she was one of the first folks I felt comfortable reaching out to. But she was a young cancer survivor herself, and then as an adult wanted to give back, and so you'll learn her journey with this as
Oh,
well. It was
oh
something
boy.
to, yeah, exactly.
But I do, I watched it last night with Lisa and we just loved Lindsay. She's so charismatic how she speaks, and just you feel it. Like if you've ever gone to a mega church, that is how it feels.
Yeah.
It's very overwhelming. All of your senses are fired, and so for her to be on stage, just the her line about don't close your eyes and don't turn your back or you could miss your
Hmm.
miracle of God answering your prayer. I mean, it just gets you fired up listening to it. I don't, it doesn't even necessarily make sense to me. I don't understand exactly what it means, but you're like,
And
yeah.
yeah, and you can see then, why, early on, when I discussed it in the podcast, like that first initial, like, oh no, this woman has cancer. Oh no, no, she doesn't. Oh, this back and forth because I'm watching that video. I'm seeing this going. Who would ever put themselves out on a stage and preach like this and put herself in this situation if she was lying? So it really, I felt very strongly about what Lisa had told me. I had no reason to doubt her, but yet to see what I was looking at, it was, and you could see why. Like, wait a minute, is this what are we dealing with here?
The thing I
So,
always say about her is she has brass balls, that girl. She gets cornered, and the anonymous teacher from Pack Point, who she just straight up says, you were late picking up your kids, the yard duty is complaining about you, and then the teacher marches to her office and says, I just talked to the yard duty, this is not true, explain yourself. And the way that Amanda just turns it around, and
yeah, well, she did
I
that all the
it's
time. She did that all the time. Yeah, it,
it
it it's
just
it's scarily impressive, right? So,
yes, that's a
yes.
good way of saying it. And just
Mhm.
she doubles down on her lies. In court, is that was on the podcast in court about her award that she was that on the podcast that
Yes,
she had
that was
said she
on
had gotten
the
an award,
podcast.
and then it was proven that that award does not exist, and she had that award made at a trophy store. I am 100% sure because that award did not exist, and brought it to court to a judge and said, I want my award submitted to evidence. And
Yes,
everybody knows it doesn't exist, but
yeah.
she's had it made
And
at a trophy
I learned
store.
over time, reading through her stuff and learning more about her, that there's sometimes like a little sliver of something that she latches onto
Mhm.
and then builds it from there. And I think because we talked about it at another time about that award, because I just found that with everything that was going on in that courtroom, I'm I'm testifying that this to her and her attorney and to a judge that she's lying. She doesn't have cancer, and she's lying about all these things she said I did. And it was more important to her to bring in this award than to deal with what was being discussed in court. So it's a very strange dynamic,
It's
and that
almost like the
we
politician
found
where you
out,
just
yeah, we
change the
found out later there
subject.
was like a similar award. She did not get the one that she claimed, but she got like a lesser, so it was just very bizarre behavior all around
Yes.
for that.
Yes. Okay, so going back to you get this tip from Lisa Berry. Now talk about how that went from a tip. You talked a little bit about how to got the tip. You didn't just believe her right off the bat. You did your research. Who is Lisa Berry? How did they know each other? You had a call with your team, and it was Crime Watch Daily.
Yeah, Crime Watch Daily.
How did it
Yes.
go from that to being a number one podcast
Yeah, it
in
was a
America?
long road, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so it went from we wrapped up the show I was on. I was working on it throughout that, and then the show stopped. And I continued to work on it because by then the federal investigation started. Um, the contacts and the people that I had spoke to were involved in that. I was helping. I say helping. I had handed everything over to them. Every now and then they would come back and ask for some additional information or to help with, hey, can we get this or whatever. And so this was going on for a number of years. And so they did the search warrant 2016.
Yep.
My court case was 2017. By then, at the 2018, my show was done. And it wasn't until 2020 is when she was actually indicted. So there was a grand jury 2019, which was a very long process. If anyone's familiar with that, it can take a very long time, and the grand jury can keep asking for more and more information from the Department of Justice, and that plays out. More people get called in to testify, and it's a process. And then 2019, there was, I guess, some final stuff with the grand jury. And then 2020 was when she was indicted. And in 2020, after she was indicted, is when I put in place my, I guess, sold what Scamanda was going to be to Pilgrim and Lionsgate. So that was kind of like, here's my project. Here's what I'd like to do. I worked in television, so my plan always was to hopefully do some type of docu-series or show.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, nobody really knew the story. It wasn't in the public eye or out there. They did a press release when there was an indictment that Department of Justice put one out.
It was
And so that's kind of when
very boring. It was not gripping.
No, I mean they had a lot of information in there, which I was like, okay, great. So that got put out in 2020, and then so that's when I entered into like, hey, let's make this TV show. Yeah, we want to do it. Let's see how we do this. And no one really knew of the case because it wasn't out there. The blog was down by then.
Yes.
It wouldn't be like anyone would really know about it. And then I went to several of her hearings, both Zoom because of COVID during that time. I would attend those, and then when we were allowed in person, it was like 2021, and so this took a long time. And so like I said, the plan was in place to hopefully do something once we could get people interested in it, and then Pilgrim and Lionsgate, the company, started a podcast division, and that's when they brought on Charlie to head that and introduced me to Charlie. And then that's when we started planning to do that first. In the world of docu-series and television and all of that, a lot of the companies now like to see podcasts or create an entity and something to kind of get an idea of what the appetite is for it. And it did not disappoint.
The appetite is there.
It did not disappoint. We would never expected that. So it was really, really fantastic to see that just take off. So yeah, and that was 2023, and here we are now. It's 2025. So
and you got the tip in what
2015.
So it was
this is going on almost 10 years, which is crazy.
Oh
well, the investigation, like once it goes to like Detective Martinez, and then I met and talked with Agent Lee, Arlette Lee, then they kind of joined forces, introduced them to each other, and then just said, hey, maybe there's something, and they were, Detective Martinez was I think excited to work with federal authorities, and it became their case together. And then they do their thing for all these years in between. I think a lot of people think it's just like, here, see, she doesn't have it, and then off, and then it's done. But in a federal investigation, it's very, very thorough, and I think that's why when it gets to the point of indictment, it's pretty locked up and pretty.
There's no no question there.
Yeah.
But I will say, once you know about the story, like you knew about the story, what, in 2015,
Mm-hmm.
It is very frustrating. There's really not a word to explain it, where you see her keep going.
Absolutely.
You see her become the principal of Pacific Point.
Yeah, it was extremely hard to sit there, and I didn't do it too well at first because I was kind of poking the bear a bit. And you'll learn a bit more. Alita was able to, she wanted to bring this into her family court case because this was outrageous, right?
Yes.
Um, and so I had to write a letter for something for Alita at one point to kind of say, here's who I am, this is what I'm doing, and I'm okay with the court, knowing that I'm at this process, and that, you know, that was kind of exposing, but it was very important for Alita's sake and for what she was dealing with. And so I was more than happy to say, listen, you do what you have to do. If this ever ends up where I can tell the story, great, but use this for what you need for your daughter. So and it was watching, there was a great deal of Amanda's family and friends and colleagues, everybody donating and thanking and continuing to run fundraisers. And every now and then I would reach out to someone to say, oh, hey, here's who I am. I just thought I'd like to ask you some questions. And no one was happy to hear from me. I mean, it was not, they were just like, how dare you, you're a horrible person. Why would you say this? And she started calling ahead to people to warn them about me, to make up this excuse. She had a really great story that
Oh,
his
yes.
ex-wife was so horrible and so terrible, that people could kind of believe that, I guess. And so you'll learn a lot more about that in the coming episodes, because you'll see how she utilized that to her benefit.
Who doesn't
Yeah.
know someone who's gone through an ugly divorce or had a crazy ex-girlfriend? And
Right.
so it's like, oh wow, she's really unhinged.
Right.
And Amanda and think she's so wonderful. You can't imagine. And it's such an awful thing to accuse someone of faking cancer that you couldn't, it makes enough sense that you're like,
And
that's just insane.
I've been working and producing true crime and television since the early 90s, and and like a lot of my colleagues, we keep a very low profile. This Instagram is the first thing I've done. So it's like I've always I prefer that. And it's like, as you're making these calls and you're reaching out on so many cases and stories. And so when she, I think, looked into me or who I was, there wasn't, now forget about it. I can never, but there wasn't anything about me out there necessarily. So she was able to say, like, this is just a friend of hers. She's not really a reporter, don't believe anything you hear. This is just, they're making all this up. And so, to her credit, like, she really got in front of it to the best she could. And it worked because, again, I'm asking someone to believe that what they've been seeing for years and years and years is a lie.
With
So,
their own eyes.
right,
Yes.
right.
That
So,
was the thing that I did a post that a lot of people liked because
yes,
there's still this question of how did she do this? It's almost the greatest magic trick anyone's ever pulled because it wasn't just believe me, it was these people experienced cancer with her.
absolutely.
They saw her suffer, they prayed, they felt scared. They were scared that she was going to die and leave her young children.
Well, remember,
They saw her pee
they
her pants and have a seizure, pass
right.
out at church. Like they experienced that
They visited
themselves. So she,
her in hospital. Like,
yes. Which,
they went
and people
to
ask
the
about that.
hospital.
And it's
Yeah.
like you pee your pants and pass out and act like you have cancer and they can't quite find your medical records. Of course, they're going to admit you overnight for observation, with no explanation. They can't say, oh, this is what happened. You were dehydrated. Like all your numbers come back great. Of course, they're going to keep running tests like she, with all of her lies. And she got very lucky in that when she did her whole scam, this was there. Now we have something called Care Everywhere, where like
I'm gonna add
Stanford
it.
and
Right.
UCSF and Kaiser can all see each other's records.
Right.
And so, but right when she did her stint was right before Care Everywhere came out. So it really was, especially if you were in the ER, they have no time, they're doing CPR, somebody's leg is falling off. They're not calling to get somebody's medical records to confirm they have cancer. It's like, are you dying? What do you need? Let's get you going. So she just got really lucky in that no ER is going to confirm that
Yeah, no,
you.
and it's my, couple of places that I was in contact with at one point as things moved ahead. Um, she had insurance with Kaiser. And
Yes.
so folks from Kaiser reached out to me at some point, and I was told that they had implemented a new system because of all of this. Because one area didn't see the other. I think it was like if the ER had your records and you came in, like they couldn't necessarily see your
Outpatient records.
regular doctor. So I
Yes.
know what she was doing was walking in and saying, I have Hodgkin's lymphoma, and I just fainted, and I just whatever, and I'm dizzy and my head hurt, whatever, may go on and on. So
Can
yeah.
you talk about Corey? And did Corey, was Corey an accomplice? Did he know? Is there any chance that, she pulled one over on him? Didn't her husband wonder where the medical bills were?
Well, look, you have to look at it this way. He told Steve and Lisa, told her that she was dying in 2010, right? She's got a few months to live. This is terrible. And Steve's consoling him and speaking with him. Steve lost his first wife, with an 8-year battle of cancer, right? So Corey knows this, and Corey's telling him that, look, I'm going through the same thing now. And they had conversations about what he was going to be up against and how Steve could help and what, So he had those conversations. And then somehow 2012, my wife has just been diagnosed, and she's saying he's coming on. And there's a ton of posts. He's my rock. He's my everything. He's by my side at every appointment, every surgery, every test.
Did she say she had brain surgery at one point? I saw that was a blurb on the docu-series, like brain surgery.
Yeah, so she had things removed, uh, growths removed from her brain. She has pictures of her with her head all wrapped up. But so
That is not how that works, by
right,
the
right,
way.
and there was a great deal of them talking about, and then Corey submitted some type of medical records to get his financial hardship and
For the
his
court.
family court. Yeah, I've seen the papers. I
Mm.
have them. He submitted he redacted what the treatments were, but left, the money
Oh,
amounts.
that's right. Wasn't there something about they added a zero?
Yes, yes. So at some point, federal agents subpoenaed all those records, right? So I had gotten them because they had submitted them to family court. So Alita was privy to all of those papers. So, they submitted medical bills and said this was for her cancer treatment. So I would imagine what he gave his lawyer, he looked at. He signed off on. He gave those medical records and bills, I should say, to
Doctored, right? Because you can't be a lawyer and knowingly give false documents to the
correct.
court.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Exactly. They were Xeroxed with Post-its over the redacted part. So and then all the money part was showing, and the front part with how much these bills were showing. Yeah,
Yes.
and
What did
they
was
signed that, this is what we spend on her cancer treatments. This is what we spend on this. This is what we. So, he submitted all that. So did he lie to the family courts, and did he not sign that? Did she sign? Like, well, what are we dealing with then?
yeah. There's no, I mean, he said I was holding her hand at chemo and in the hospital and in the ER, which maybe she was in the hospital and ER. We'll get into what she's been up to lately. But was money a driving factor in the deceit? Were they having financial issues?
Well, they did file for bankruptcy, but that he had filed for bankruptcy a few years before, and then he filed again with her. He always had a job. It wasn't like he wasn't working.
Hmm.
Um, and he had a decent paying job. She would have work periodically till she was too sick to work, right? And so that's a whole nother thing we'll we get into in the docu-series. But yeah, so they
What did she spend all this money on? That's, I
well,
think,
in the
something
bankruptcy
useful.
filings, there's 140, 50,000 in educational loans of sorts. There's Target, there's cars, there's like a vet there. I mean, there's a long list of debt,
I think
but
at one
a lot.
point you said it's all just living expenses, though. It was
Yeah, yeah.
nothing
There was no
crazy,
medical in any of that.
no medical, but
Um,
also it sounded like there wasn't any, they didn't go to Spain for a month. They didn't buy a yacht. It
no,
was just
no,
regular
no.
things. They just
I
spent
think it
money on
was just
regular things.
keeping up with whatever. I mean, she always had very well dressed, very well put together. Not high end designer bags, but very nicely done. They rented a home that they were given a preferential rent for because how sick she was. So they lived in a very, very, expensive area in a modest home, and worked out some type of, rent for that they could, I guess, do, or maybe they couldn't do on just his salary. But whatever it was, there that combination of attention and money was needed.
I I mean, I say this in my post too. It really is the perfect lie because nobody can prove that you don't have cancer unless they look at your medical records. And guess what? If you look at someone's medical records, by law, you will lose your job if you open your mouth. So that setup alone is so perfect. And and then just how she could bend it, like again, she's writing her own fiction story, and what she really wants people to see, she can make it happen.
Yeah.
People are praying for a miracle, she can make a miracle happen. Like,
Yes.
she can control everything. And she wants to go to New York for Christmas. Guess what? There's a clinical trial in New York, and she gets to see the Rockefeller tree lit up, and it's what she's
Mhm.
always wanted, and people fly her first class. I mean, I was shaking my head in my car thinking, it's genius, really. The lie and how it can become whatever you want.
Sure.
You need money, you actually want to go back to work, you're in remission, you're doing great. And she would kind of start over. I mean, I could really go on and on, but more questions. I know we're kind of running out of time, and we're going to do this again weekly, every Friday. There's 3 more episodes. And then starting next week, we're going to have very special guests join us. Was she successful at getting a restraining order against you?
Um, she was successful with a temporary restraining order, because of really just logistics and me getting up to court. They didn't think I needed to go because I wasn't served properly. And the judge just decided in Northern California, like, you know what? If she's not here by 1 o'clock and I'm in Los Angeles and it's 10 o'clock in the morning, we went to the airport, myself, a lawyer, and, trying to get up there. And they just decided to just issue the temp and give us more time, like a 10-day time limit to, then show up in court. And then that's where it just never happened. So we got the 10-day restraining order, temporary, was put into place. And then it was after the 10th day, they lifted it, but we still couldn't get to handle it for another almost 6 months because of her medical condition and her having to be in the hospital every time I flew up there. So again, the manipulation and the progress took a very long time for what this was and how simply it could be handled.
Yes.
And you guys will learn more. Did she ever admit she was lying?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, she well, she had to when she pled not guilty, and then she had a change of plea, which you'll learn about,
Too
um,
guilty.
to guilty. And that was probably, she never said it. She never said, I don't have cancer. She just had to agree to what the judge read. Yeah. So that was pretty much it. And then, you know, she talks about in the podcast you heard, she talks about um, what, not even being kind of like she's very regretful for what she did, but she never gets up there and says, I do not have cancer.
I honestly, and then it seems like in reading everything afterwards, her and some members of her family, I think I read an article saying her dad made some comment about, well, you don't know the full story. She is sick and there's more to the story. That seems to be the tagline. There's more to
That
the
was Corey.
story.
Yeah.
Oh, that was Corey. There's more to the story. But then you see it's so refreshing to just see the church video where she's standing on stage in church in
Hmm.
front of God and hundreds, if not thousands of
Oh, it
people
was
saying,
thousands.
so
Yeah.
specific, I was diagnosed with stage 3 blood cancer. And you're just like, that is a
Hmm.
lie. That is a big lie. And that's not a misunderstanding. There's not more to that story. You were not diagnosed with stage 3 blood cancer, in fact.
Right.
And so you just kind of, she does this job of spinning it where you don't, she changes the subject and then you are talking
Yeah.
about something else. And there's more to the
Well,
story. And she's really
and
sick.
that's an
And
example. Someone's asking, do you estimate the total value of donations and gifts? That money that was put at their feet on stage has nothing to do with the 105,000 that was the wire fraud, right? Because anything that came in cash, checks directly to them that did not go through Support Amanda is not counted in that 105,000. So to answer that question, I think that day alone was upwards of almost 5,000, if not more, that they collected on
it's a
stage. So
lot of
um,
love,
a lot, yeah, yeah.
a lot for
And
the love
I kicked
offering.
myself because there was a video of the entire money process. There's stills that you saw, the stills, and then you saw the recreation um, that they based off the stills. But at one point years ago, there was a video that was on the church website, and I thought I saved it way back when, and I did not. I was not great at tech back then at all, so I thought I had it. But the stills, you can really get the feeling. But that video was at least, oh, I want to say a half hour of people. That's how long people coming up, putting the money down,
Nobody
and music playing.
carries cash
And
anymore either. So that's maybe they were used to offerings like that.
yeah,
But something that I hope the docu-series starts to go over, but that's been really impactful in my life is the ways that people were stolen from, the cost that wasn't money, that was time. That's Mahasti explaining, the feeling of getting a call in the middle of the night that someone you love is in the hospital is traumatic. That's
yeah,
terrifying. You're driving to the ER. Oh, how can I help? You're disoriented. Like you can't put a price tag on your blood pressure going up. You're feeling terrified. The prayers. I mean, when she was a teacher, she told children, I'm so sad I'm not going to be able to see my kids grow up.
right.
Pray for me to young
Well,
children. And they
they held assemblies for her. Yeah,
and that them going home and praying every night, my teacher is
right.
gonna like just having to be a young kid grasping with the thought of your teacher dying and her not being able to see her kids
Well,
grow
and
up is
her
just
own children and Jessa. I mean,
oh yeah, I mean they'll get into that more.
Jessa is such a young girl. Being told that your stepmom, who is you're very close with, is dying. You may need to give bone marrow. You
That
may need to
part
this, and then
made me so mad.
you've
There was
got
no reason for
exactly.
them to say, get ready to donate bone marrow. Like, that's all I have
Yeah,
to say about that. That they, there's the money. That's obvious, the motivation there. But them telling, oh, I'm like about to vomit and
yeah, and
cry,
it
thinking
doesn't.
about her sitting in the back seat by herself and they're saying, get ready to donate bone marrow to your stepmom. Like, that is just disgusting.
Right,
There's no, I mean, she
and then you have to
already
kind of
was
think about
terrified.
that.
There's no need,
So
there's no gain.
let's say so. You know, this is coming from Corey and Amanda, right? Corey's saying, "Oh, this may happen." So where's he getting this from? Did he go to the doctors? Is he just, you're telling your kid this?
There's no
Come on.
way he didn't know she was lying, right? Like, we
There's,
can
as
agree on that.
far as I'm concerned.
I mean, yeah, he told Steve Barry she was diagnosed, she's dying, and then they act in 2012 that she's been re-diagnosed all over again with the birth of the baby. He had to know just from that they were lying. He lived through that. He was standing there asking Lisa Barry for a check for $500 in 2010. There's no way that he didn't know she was lying by saying, I've been diagnosed for the first time at birth in
Yeah,
2012. So that alone, like that's what Lisa Barry was 100% sure on that she was lying is like, no, that's 2 years later. You told me you were dying two
right.
years ago. How are you
Yeah,
just diagnosed? That's why it's so black and white there.
right. And then, you again, like I said, there was a lot of situations where you're handing in records, you're asking the court, can we change dates because I'm taking my wife to her bone marrow transplant. So did you go to the bone marrow transplant? Because you just told the court you were.
Yeah.
You just read your whole bankruptcy court, and we have recordings of that was in the podcast. Like,
They have zero respect for the court. I mean, even
no.
just making that, she knew, she drove to a trophy shop and had a trophy made for an award that didn't exist, and then brought it to the court, and it's like just no respect. Well, Amanda did say if she had the cancer. Okay, I do want to clear this up as an oncology nurse. I had a patient with lymphoma who was pregnant, and it was a very big process. I loved her. I love her to this day. Her daughter is like 10, I want to say now. But she was diagnosed with lymphoma while she was pregnant. I had to organize her chemos so that her birth happened. She was being induced when she wasn't in her nadir and so neutropenic. So it is not impossible. Her story is not impossible.
Well, no,
It's
she said
rare.
but remember, she told Lisa that the
It
cancer
was
was
reversing her disease.
reversing the cancer. The pregnancy was reversing the
Well,
cancer.
that part is not true, but
Because we'd have a
people
lot
were
of
like,
cancer patients having children, well, oh my God, let's fix this, right? Come on. Yeah.
but so it is not impossible to
No, you
get
can
chemotherapy while pregnant.
absolutely have chemo. Like
There's
that, I think that
there's
was.
lots of different kinds,
Mhm.
so many of them would cause the baby to die or be grossly disfigured. So it totally depends on the kind of cancer and the specific chemotherapy ordered. But her story at face value is not something where you would just say, nope, that could never happen. It could
Correct.
happen.
Yeah, I think it was the reversing the disease, which was key.
That one was rich. Okay, last question. And then, I mean, obviously, we could talk all night. I'm so excited to continue this little teaser for next week.
Wait,
Are you
what did we cover?
investigating?
The first episode basically covered getting to know Amanda, getting to know how she fit into the church, how big this got. And I want to say Lindsay did a beautiful job, the first time she prayed and the fainting and the peeing. I want to, that just brings back the memories for me because that was her go-to move. And so when people say, my theory on this has always been because it happened several times in her blog over the course of the
Tell
years.
them your theory. It's
Yeah,
good.
this is how I feel, 100% how I feel. Because she went to get water and then collapsed, and she didn't. I don't think she urinated. I think she just poured water, told everyone she urinated so she could be so humble and so embarrassed, and everyone like, oh my God, because she wrote it in her blog. You have to remember, like, it happened, and then she put, I can't believe I peed myself. I'm so embarrassed. Here I am in the ER. And then that happened at her place of work. At one time, she got hired at the Lymphoma Society. She donated time there and whatever, and then they hired her to help work on stuff. And I had been calling and talking to their headquarters, and I think word got back. The next thing you know, she's fainting at work. She peed herself, ended up in the hospital, and they found me on the floor. They came around the corner, and there I was. I was passed out. I had tweeted and then there was a third time in her blog. So like, I'm not buying. She's peeing herself left and right. That's just me.
Even just that story, though, it's twofold in why she was so good at what she did. Number one is you find someone passed out, you're
Right.
terrified. Your fight or flight is kicked in, and that is going to be, you're going to be trauma bonded with that person. Like your adrenaline is pumping. Like you're not just reading this on a blog, you're living this trauma with her and you're seeing it with your own eyes. So somebody telling you she's lying, there was a great quote, I think, from the podcast that the person learned she was lying and said, no, that's not possible. I saw this
Right.
happen. It wasn't just that I read it. I saw it. I lived it. It happened to me with her.
Right.
And then the peeing the pants is exactly as you said. I have an amazing story. I won't go through the whole story, but I was playing a prank in high school and I did the same thing. I poured water on my pants to make a person feel bad for me. And she felt so badly for me that then she told me this whole story about how she pooped her pants. And then I had to say, oh my gosh, I was lying. But it's like telling her seeing me and thinking that I peed my pants made her feel so badly
Comfortable.
for me
Right.
and
And you
comfortable.
feel
It brought her guard right down. And then she's telling me her most vulnerable story. And then I felt like a real piece of crap having to say, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't actually, that
Right.
was a joke. But Amanda was not a joke. She used that process of
I mean, that's
seeing
what I
somebody
think. And
through
just
your
because,
pants. Oh yeah.
yeah, I know people can pay their pay, but like this was like a thing. And this was, and then there was always a write up about, oh my goodness, look at me. She
Yes.
still tells that story. Okay. Hilarious. I love it.
Okay, and then last question before I let you go. Are you investigating others for faking cancer? I mean, I've fielded some tips for you about people writing in saying, I
Yes,
think
because
this person, that person.
since we've met, I'm like, ooh, oncology nurse. This will be easier because I am not. Like, take a look at this. What do you think? Is
But
this the
it's
drug
still
that they would
hard.
use?
It's still
It
hard.
is. Yeah, I'm looking at a few. I mean, again, it's not like something I go out to look at and gonna like zoom into all this stuff all the time. There was one that I looked at and actually made some headway speaking to the woman, and lo and behold, speaking to, because she was really, there's a big following about her, on some Reddit posts and stuff about they don't no one believing her, whatever. I felt pretty confident, and she invited me to actually participate in a something with her doctors and to see it for myself. And that's not something I would normally do, but I did it because I saw what was being said and how large an group was like not believing her. And so in that situation, I felt, and from talking and being involved with what I saw in the doctor speaking and all of this, that she does have cancer. And so, you know, how they portray it and how they put themselves out there, may be a way. And I spoke with that woman at length about it, because she was genuinely asking about that. I said, well, I can see why people feel this way. Like, you put yourself out there, you're going to get the criticism. People are going to look at everything. But no, there's definitely ones that I am looking at. And there's a gal on the East Coast, trying to figure out what to do with that one. I'm at the point. I worked with several folks that found me via the podcast, and they said, wait, we think this, and a blog, a very large GoFundMe. And so I've been talking to different officials about that and reaching out and talking to folks. And it's just in that it's been a little long and that they don't know if they can charge her or not.
Mhm.
And I've been waiting to kind of hear where that's going to fall, because I think it's important to do something about that one.
Yeah.
It's just not quite there yet for me to do, but I hope I can. And if I never do a show about it or a story about it, at least maybe she will stop. That's always my goal first, and if anything comes from there, great. But in the meantime,
Like stop
um,
more victims from
yeah,
happening because it's not just
it's
financial.
it
And this is something too
taking
that
the resources away. If you are utilizing doctor visits or consultations and ER staff, and you know taking it to the extent that Amanda was, yeah, you need to be stopped in some capacity. And I'm glad, from doing the podcast and now this, if it creates a few more people maybe speaking up and questioning someone, as horrible as that sounds, it can, people with social media and all of this, it's very, very easy to take from so many people very quickly. And so I do think we have to be pretty on top of things and not be afraid to question something. No
discerning.
one wants to live like that, but I think you have to. It's
Yeah,
taking
that's
away
a
so many
good.
resources and help that could go for people that really need it.
That went into in prison. She has continued to
Yes.
utilize the ER, and I wrote up two different people who were at Carswell with her had
Mhm.
said, she's taking so many resources from the limited resources that are
That are
available for
already
these
there.
women in prison, and so she's just hogging them all and she doesn't need them. And so that, but I do want to touch on and hopefully we'll get into later, like, how do you move forward, but just how her victims, how do you trust yourself if you believed her and she was your friend and you gave her all of these things? Like, how do you come back from that and learn to trust your own intuition? Because especially in the Christian world, in church, you feel like the Holy Spirit is is guiding you to give. And so that's been interesting, asking some folks, do you regret giving, or how do you move forward after
Yeah.
being, especially in the church context, of feeling like, God's put it on my heart to give, and then to find out, lo and behold, she didn't need that. She wasn't getting chemo.
Right.
That's something that I don't feel like has been talked about, and I'm dying for the church to address it. I'm just desperate for a sermon on how do you come back from that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I a lot of the victims that were with the church that I've spoken to since, I'm really impressed with everyone. Like, this isn't going to stop us from giving, and we don't want it to stop us from giving to others and of ourselves to others. And I think that's great. I mean, with some folks, maybe they're a little more skeptical. Maybe they'll give to a particular organization as opposed to maybe an individual. I mean, I think you just have to kind of. It's hard to give advice because my advice would have been, if it's someone in your community that you're seeing, touching, knowing, then maybe it's okay. But that is what Amanda was. So um it's a tough one to say that it wouldn't happen to other people, right? Because it's just hard to. I think you have to look out for the constant miracles and long constant need. If I don't get this, I'm going to die. If I don't get this, I need that money. That maybe is the red flags to kind of keep an eye out, because I've there's many cancer patients that I've met through doing this. I've said, I never asked for I never would do that. Like, I just want to just get better. Like, that's awesome, but I'm asking for it. Please just get better. So, I think maybe those are the signs that if it's a constant ask for money and everything, maybe that's something to look at. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Well, to be continued. Thank you so much for
Okay.
joining me, Nancy. I can't wait to talk to you next week and see the doc next Thursday.
Yep.
Yee, finally.
Meet Alita and company.
Yes, I know, finally. All
All
right.
right.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.